Okay, let's begin with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so very thankful for this morning. We ask for your blessing upon this day. We thank you for the rest that we can have in sleep, especially in this world that is so restless. And we know, Lord, that we can trust in you, that we can come to Christ, and that he will give us rest. We ask, Lord, that as we study together, that your Holy Spirit can speak to us, that we can have confidence in the things that you are doing and showing us, and that you are leading this movement in spite of what human eyes may perceive, that you have a work to do upon each of our hearts. And we ask that we can allow you to do that work. We ask that you can guide the study this morning, that you can correct any errors we may have in our understanding. And we pray this and thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, good morning, everyone. And make sure your microphone's off because somebody's microphone was on. So this chart here we had looked at on Thursday, this timeline for Abraham or Abram. And it had some errors on it. So first, he had the 430 years begin when Abraham is 70. And so he had a period of 220 years. And that period of 220 years is still valid. I mean, Abram's 70 years old when he's in Ur. Now, the fact that he said that Abraham's 70 years old when he's in Ur means that this person is aware of Ellen White's statement that, at least he should be, in order to have that assumption. And maybe he just made that assumption. I don't know. But I would think then he must be an Adventist if he's going to have that. And that's because Ellen White talks about the offering of Isaac when he's going to be 20 years of age. And that is going to be 50 years before. So Abraham's going to be 120. And so that means he would have been, that it was 50 years before that he came out of Ur. So now he had actually had in his chart 25 years of age. So that didn't make sense. Or he said, I think he had maybe about 25 years of age, but he would be 20 years of age when Isaac was offered. And then he marked, instead of the weaning of Isaac for the 400 years to begin, he marked the birth of Isaac. So I added that there, changed it to 400 years, added Galatians 4:29, where it talks about basically the mocking of Isaac, that's the persecuting that began. So that's the 400 years of affliction. And corrected a couple of other little things. Of course, the one in the bottom left where he had the answer to the apparent discrepancy in Genesis 11:25, 32, and 12:4 is that Abram was not the first son of Terah, but rather the last. And he was not born when Terah was 70, but rather 130. And he had 155. So he had 25 years added in there that was sort of inexplicable. So he had obviously just made some kind of mental error when he did that.
He possibly did. You don't know if it's obvious. An obvious answer.
Now he did make an error.
Okay, but it's not obvious to all of us necessarily.
Okay. Yeah. My wife says I say obviously too much when things are not always obvious. So, but in this case, he definitely made a mistake. So we would have to say. Now, we're going to use this chart a little bit again, but what I'm really going to try to do is to draw out these lines and understand them a little bit better. And I've been reading through these sections in Genesis, and there is so much in this story. I mean, we could definitely do some of these chapters. We could do a whole week study if we chose to. Now, I want to look here at Genesis 18. I don't know if I should look at this first. Okay, before we look at Genesis 18, because we're going to look at the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah and the significance of that. So we know that, here, I'm going to go to the whiteboard first. I guess if I draw this out, this might be helpful. Now I'm switching my microphone to my tripod microphone because it's better when I'm up there. But when I come back and sit down, I need to switch it back, and somebody may need to remind me of that. Can you grab me one of those pens there, please? Because everyone's getting weak.
Yeah, your sound has dropped off dramatically.
Yeah, but now when I'm up here, it'll be fine. Right? Because I'm using the microphone right in front of me. Okay, so there's different ways we can look at all of this, depending on whether we're zoomed in or not. But I'm saying, or suggesting, that this is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are the first, second, and third angel's messages, and Joseph is the fourth. That is, in each of these reform lines, you're always going to have this fourth that happens. And Joseph is going to be the fourth. It's going to be this 3-1 combination. Now, within each of these waymarks in this reform line, we would have a waymark or a reform line in each of these waymarks. So if we were going to look at Abram or Abraham, what is the reform line of Abraham? What is the symbol that we're using? What is it about?
The covenants?
Okay, so it's the covenants. And we know that we're going to have, in his personal reform line, we're going to have, I'm just going to put his age here. So it's going to be when he's 75. Now, this one we're not certain of exactly. What would be the best guess for when the covenant is given in Genesis 15? What age would we suggest? Because we know he's going to have a covenant here. How old is he going to be when the covenant is made in regard to Isaac?
Okay, you have the Bible up on the screen and not what you're writing on the line.
Okay, thanks. Stop the share there. Okay, there we go. So, well, we'll say when he offers up Isaac, he's 120. So what are these two here? What is the second? What is the third? So this is the first covenant, the second covenant, the third covenant, and the fourth. So what is this one, the third one? And how old is he?
99.
Okay, so he's going to be 99 years old. Okay, so that's when what's going to happen here? What is the covenant here?
What's the purpose of the covenant? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, and I'm just going to put that this is chapter 12. This is going to be chapter 15. This is chapter is this one? Anybody know where this is? It would have to be. Is it chapter 17? Pretty sure.
Yeah, that's the covenant of circumcision right
Right.
there.
Yeah, okay. And then this one is 20. Is it 20? No, it's got to be earlier.
22.
22? Okay, I was thinking 22, but I thought that's too good to be true. And this one is 15. So how old is he approximately? Because we
Well,
know it's before the birth of Ishmael.
I'm still thinking that we could be 80, but he could have been 80, but it's possible that he could have been 85.
Okay, so it's 80 to 85, we'll just say, somewhere in there. I mean, I lean towards that he's probably 84 or 85, but so we don't know exactly. But we can see here that there's these covenants. Now, this personal reform line of Abram is about the covenants, but it's specifically about the seed. Would we agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay, because this is all about this promise to him, which is about the promise of the seed, which goes back to Genesis chapter 3. And yet we have a reform line that's in response to darkness, right? So we know that there is a darkness here. There's a reform line that's occurring here. We have this period of darkness. However, we want to understand that we know that this is after the Tower of Babel. Tower of Babel, I mark as the first generation. And that there's reform lines within that. So this progressive destruction of 4, however we want to look at it, we would have to say that Abraham marks the 4th generation. That is, he marks that progressive destruction of 4 at the end. So there's a period of darkness before Abraham. And that darkness is what? What is the darkness that occurs from the time of the flood to Abraham? How would we characterize that darkness?
It's the misapprehension of God's character.
Okay, it's a misapprehension of God's character, which is always the darkness. I mean, so that's true, but it's not very specific. Because if we think about this reform line here, it's addressing, I would say, because we have Noah. So when we look at Noah's history, he's addressing sin, right? That is the darkness of sin. The thoughts of their hearts is only evil continually. And then Noah comes, and we're going to have the dividing of all of these people. That is, all of these nations are going to be created. Before that, there's just the sons of God and the daughters of men. So, I mean, it's men who are following God, people who are following God, and people who aren't. And then we have this flood. And after the flood, there's this rebellion against God that's going to result in the confusion of tongues and the peopling of the earth. And if we think about the peopling of the earth in context of the seed, what we see now is the seed is divided. So maybe a good way to look at this is the earth or the seed is divided, right? So that's the darkness. It's unclear where God's promises are going to be fulfilled from Genesis chapter 3. So now God's going to come to Abraham and he's going to say, you're the one that I've chosen through whom the promised seed is going to come. But there's going to be many nations that are going to come from your loins. So even though there's this all of these nations, all of these peoples, all of the Gentiles, God is choosing a specific line to bless the Gentiles. And he's going to use Abraham to do that. Does that make sense to people?
Yeah, it seems to.
Okay.
Seems to add up.
Because if we believe that a reform line is in response to darkness, we would have to see that the darkness here has to do with the promises of God that were given back in the Garden of Eden. And how are they going to be fulfilled? now that the world is divided. And so God's going to have to choose someone to fulfill that promise. And he's going to choose Abraham. Through Abraham, he's going to do that. He's going to call him out of Babylon, out of Ur of the Chaldees, into the land that he will show him. And he's going to give him these series of covenants. And we can see when he offers up Isaac here, that this is a culmination of these three covenants. And he can see now and believe that God must be able to raise up Isaac, because it's through Isaac shall thy seed be called. So Abraham goes through this personal experience, which is a reform line, but it's all in the first angel's message of this reform line. That is, this is the reform line. This is the major reform line that we're choosing to start Israel. But we would still argue that this is a zoomed in reform line on literal Israel. That is, this itself is not the next waymark after Noah on the big cosmic line. That this is literal Israel. And so this itself, this reform line, if you're going to look up here, we got another reform line up here. And this reform line is going to be the literal Israel reform line. And this is going to be the first one. Right? So all of this and all of this are part of literal Israel on the cosmic line. And this is just the first waymark. And then this is the first waymark within the first waymark of this waymark. I know, so knowing where we are zoomed down in, we can see that there is a bigger darkness that's addressing literal Israel, but it first starts with this line of Abraham, with these covenants. Now, then Isaac is going to have a reform line. Now, what's Isaac's reform line about? We haven't really looked at Isaac too much yet. Where would Isaac's reform line begin? Because it's going to be connected to this one. So if we think about this, and maybe I'm not even doing this right. I mean, maybe I could argue that all of this is, the arrival, formalization, empowerment, and something of the first angel's message. And maybe that's how we could look at this reform line. When we go up here, we could look at it as that. I don't know. So we're going to have to think about that. But can we see that Isaac is a reform line, that Jacob has a reform line, and that Joseph has a reform line?
Yeah, they all do.
Yeah, okay.
All do.
Yeah. Now, Isaac's reform line, to me, it's the most difficult out of all the reform lines to sort of define, when it starts.
If he has started his deception with his brother,
Okay, so
maybe a start. I don't know.
okay, so I don't know if I would start it at the deception. Now, it's
Probably
possible.
birth, or maybe the birthright. With the bowl of lentils.
Well, I mean, I think we would maybe start it with his birth, and then we would have to look at, what happens at the weaning of Isaac. I would think that would be all part of this, but I'm not certain. That is, I haven't really spent as much time thinking about Isaac's. I've been trying to read it and understand how we would formulate his reform line, because at his weaning, there's going to be the work of the enemy, right? And and we haven't even defined all of this in this reform line, but we know there's the work of the enemies in the story of Abraham. But what is the work of the enemies in the story of Abraham? Well, there's quite a few different things we could look at. But so in this reform line, in these covenants, you're still going to see lots of things that are happening. And somebody might argue you would start when he's 70 in this reform line because he's called out of Ur. But I'm starting with chapter 12, which really does start with the call out of Ur. So you might hear say 70 to 75, maybe that's better. But you can see we've spent some time looking at Abraham. We haven't really looked at Isaac too much. Now it's going to be Jacob.
I was thinking of Jacob when I.
Yeah, you're thinking of Jacob, the exception here. So you're thinking of Jacob.
Yeah, I was thinking of Jacob when you mentioned Isaac.
Yeah. Well, but there still is the deception here because Isaac is part of that story.
Right.
Okay, so that's what I thought you were referring to. So with Isaac, he's going to be party to what happens with Jacob and Esau, right?
Yeah.
Now you also have here with Isaac, you have the situation with Ishmael, and then you have the offering of Isaac. Right, so you're going to have, the weaning of Isaac, and then you're going to have the offering that's going to be made later when he's 20. So you have a whole bunch of history here with Isaac, and Isaac's going to be involved in this situation with Jacob and Esau, right? Because Isaac's he's going to be the one that's deceived, and so you can start to see as we start to look at these lines. We can see that these lines are really integrated with each other.
Yeah.
That you're going to have, in the story of Abraham, he's going to have his personal reform line. Isaac's going to have his personal reform line. Jacob is. Joseph is. But there still is this reform line in which we could, if we're going to just take Abraham himself, so don't look at, or not Abraham himself, but this reform line itself, we would need a formalization. So you're going to have the first angel arrive, whenever that is. The first angel formalized, and the first angel is empowered. And then in the story of Isaac, you're going to have the second angel arriving, the second angel formalized, and the second angel empowered, if this is correct on what I'm doing. Now, Jacob would be the arrival of the third angel's message. And yet within Jacob, there is this very detailed reform line that he personally has. But we can also see that the story of Jacob is tied up with Joseph, because this is going to be when they go into Egypt. Jacob is the one that goes into Egypt in Joseph's reform line. So again, this is an extremely complex series of events that they're interwoven with each other, these reform lines, because Abraham is connected to Isaac. Isaac is connected to Jacob. And events in Abraham's reform line are also events in Isaac's reform line. And events in Jacob's reform line are events in Isaac's reform line. And events in Joseph's reform line are events in Jacob's reform line. So they intertwined with each other. Now, so a person could take these. So even though we believe in these covenants of Abraham, I'm erasing this just. So we could say with Abraham, this could be the first covenant, right? So we can say this is when Abraham's 70 to 75. And the formalization, we could argue, is when he's 80 to 85. That's Genesis 15. And the empowerment, this would be when he's 99. And then we could argue that when he's 120, that's the second angel arriving. That's when he's offering up Isaac or something like that. But yet in the story of Isaac, he's going to have his experiences. They're not necessarily going to line up. So one of the problems that we have to address is, remember, in a reform line, you got the 1, the 2, the 3, but you also have this, which in Millerite history is the development of the second angel. That is, this is our history. This is this movement in the context of this history. And so this is Samuel Snow's letters. This is FFA. This is our 777 days, or even our whole 777 chiasm. That's all connected with the second angel's message. And the second angel's message, depending on where you are in a line, this is always Babylon is fallen. So we would have to take this line in this story and create this history, to see how it all fits in. So we'd have to place all of this so that it lines up with our history. And it's not the easiest thing to do. Now I'm going to erase all this, and I'm going to try to simplify what's happening here. So we have this. Whoops. And this what is this?
Prophecy given to Abraham about the 430 years where his progeny would be in submission with the Gentiles.
Okay. Yeah, and so this is the beginning of ancient Israel. Right?
Correct.
And maybe I'll say, well, we could say ancient Israel. I'm just going to say literal Israel. Now, this is the beginning of it. We're also going to have an end of literal Israel. Correct?
Correct.
Okay, and I'm arguing that all of this, and if we were going to mark the end of literal Israel, how would we mark it? If I was going to draw a line, what would I put at the end? What would I put at the beginning? How would I draw this line? So if I'm going to say this is the end of literal Israel.
That says begging of Israel, not beginning.
Here.
2 ends.
2 ends?
Yes.
I don't have spell check on this
You do
whiteboard.
now.
Okay. Because there's lots of ways I could draw this out. But what if I did this?
You said the end of ancient Israel, you said?
Yeah, of literal Israel.
The literal Israel.
Yeah.
Would it be 677, 723? Kind of,
Okay, well,
probably not.
this is connected to this. But if I was going to take a chiasm, so this is a chiasm that marks the beginning of literal Israel. That is, it's going to start with Abraham being called out of Ur of the Chaldees, right? Or here this is Haran that I marked here, because I have to go 1968 BC when he came out of Ur.
You mean 1963?
68 he came out of Ur, 63 he came out of Haran.
Oh,
So, but I'm marking this because this is the 430 years. And we can see that this chiasm is connected to this chiasm. That they're both structural chiasms, and that the 430, which is the beginning of literal Israel, this is what Abraham sees in Genesis 15. This is the sign that he asked that would be a witness to after generations. Right? He asked for a sign, and then he was told to cut the animals in half, and they made this covenant. Right? And this is what he sees. Not literally sees it, but symbolically sees it. Right? And he's given the 400 years and the 4 generations. So the 4 generations are in this history from when they go into Egypt. The 400 years is this period of affliction that begins with the mocking of Isaac by Ishmael. But we can see that the end of literal Israel is this structural chiasm here. Now, of course, this is added to and part of a whole bunch of other structures. Do people agree with this, that this is the end of literal Israel, that I can take the week of Christ, because these are 1260 days.
In 34 AD would be the end of ancient Israel.
Right, okay, yeah. And this is a reform line as well. And this is a reform line as well. Because the cross is what waymark in a reform line?
what waymark?
What,
Chiasm or
okay, what do we say the cross is?
Center of the chiasm?
Okay, but in the
Pivotal?
context of last day's events, what does it symbolize?
The
Sunday law.
Okay, it's the Sunday law, right?
Okay.
Now, is the Sunday law, and it depends on how we look at it, because when Jeff would look at it, wouldn't he do this? The Sunday law is at the end of a reform line.
I would think that to be correct.
Yeah, okay. But we have this reform line, and we're saying that the Sunday law is the center of this chiasm. Why is that? Okay, what's at the center of this chiasm?
Joseph.
Okay. Yeah. So this is the story of Joseph. Now, is this the Sunday law, the story of Joseph? Does it illustrate the Sunday law?
They must all follow the same pattern, no?
Yeah, they do.
Well, then that would be correct, yes.
Yeah. Now, if this is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is this a reform line? Because Jacob is the one who goes down into Egypt, right?
Well, Abraham goes to Egypt as well.
Yeah, but I mean in the context of this captivity.
Agreed.
Yeah. So Jacob is the one who's representing the third angel's message. But Joseph, he goes down into Egypt, but he goes down into Egypt beforehand. Correct?
This
Repeat your question, please.
Okay, Joseph goes to Egypt before Jacob does.
Correct.
Okay. Now, I've argued that Joseph represents this movement.
I don't see that could be disagreed with.
not.
A
Okay.
lot of reform lines could represent this movement.
Just hang on. Maria, can you turn off your microphone, please? There. You're talking there. Okay, so Jeff, you had a comment?
A lot of reform lines could represent this movement. And many reform lines can represent this movement.
Okay, but in a reform line, our movement is a specific part of a reform line. That is, it's a development of the second angel's message that leads to the third, that leads to the Sunday law, because the second angel's message is a warning of the Sunday law, correct?
Yep.
Okay, and the Sunday law is this way marked here. There's a second angel's message in this history. Who's the first angel's message in the history of Christ? What is the first angel's message? Who gives it?
John the Baptist.
Right. So you're going to have John here, right? And then who gives the second angel's message? In the history of Christ.
Jesus.
Yeah. Jesus does, right? Because he's proclaiming that he's going to die. But is there a development of this second angel's message? And would we say that development is the disciples? That the disciples represent this movement?
Yeah, they go through disappointment and such.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. And they also are being given light regarding the second angel's message. That is, the history of the disciples, the calling of the disciples, is this development of the second angel's message. This is Samuel Snow getting an increase of light. That is, this is the increase of light on the second angel's message. Now, the disciples before the cross, do they have a disappointment? Before the cross, anybody know what we would mark there?
Peter denies Christ.
Okay, well that would I wouldn't put that as the disappointment.
Well, I mean, all the disciples scatter. Sure.
Okay, yeah, that's true. But I would put this is in connection with the Sunday law.
But Jesus doesn't take the earthly kingdom, he doesn't set up his throne on earth. This would be a disappointment, and I would think.
Yeah. Okay. What about John chapter? Can you see that 6 down there? Probably not. I'll put it up.
No.
John
There you go.
6. Six.
Oh.
What is that?
And they walk no more with him.
Okay. Is that a disappointment? John 6, 6. That
Yes.
prefigures this.
Absolutely.
And I would argue this is July 18th that precedes the Sunday law. That is, July 18th in Samuel Snow's letters is that prediction before midnight. And I would argue that this is the prediction before midnight.
Seems to line up.
Okay. Now, so we can see in this huge chiasm and in this chiasm that we can see that there is a reform line that precedes it, that this is the arrival of the third angel's message. And the arrival of the third angel's message in the story of Jacob, his reform line precedes this, but the arrival of the third angel's message in this bigger reform line is when he comes to Egypt, because that's the Sunday law. He comes during the Sunday law, because the Sunday law is during the famine, correct? This is what Jeff taught, but is he correct?
I would say yes.
Okay. So who is Joseph? Is he not the same as the disciples, the same as Samuel Snow, the same as this movement, that he precedes his reform line here, this increase of light, is Joseph from the time that he has his dream until he stands before Pharaoh. He has his dreams. Could you see that this is this increase of light in Joseph's life, just as you see in Samuel Snow, just as you see in this movement?
All right.
Okay. Because this is the argument that I've been making for quite a long time regarding the Sunday law, is that this movement is an increase of light on the second angel's message. And then the second angel's message has to be given. So when Joseph stands before Pharaoh, he's now going to give this message, and that message is going to bring about the Sunday law. It's connected to the Sunday law. So when we look at our line, our personal line of this movement, that is FFA, it ended on December 25th, 2021. The Sunday law is still future. But our movement has been about a development of an understanding of the message that's to be given to prepare people for the Sunday law.
I thought it ended on December 6th.
December
2020.
25th, December 25th, 2021 is the end of our 777 days,
It's the end of
Okay.
FFA line.
right?
Well, FFA ended December 6th, 2020.
You're thinking of Jack. Oh, you're talking about what happened with FFA in 2020.
Yeah, but they ended there.
Okay, that's not the end of our line.
Oh,
That is-
okay,
that
I
is-
got you.
That is the end of the separation. So remember in Samuel Snow's history, I'm just going to erase the top part of this. So remember in Samuel Snow's history that he's got a line of Samuel Snow's letters. So this is Samuel Snow's letters, right? And his letters are part of a chiasm that relates to the Passovers. So you got April 19th. I don't know, can you see that
Yeah. Well, maybe not that
on
one.
there? Yeah, April 19th. And then you're going to have the two Passovers. So you're going to have a Passover here, but that's not the correct Passover. And then you have a Passover here. And the Passover is about the separation. So this is the correct one. Okay? And there's two different ways in which the chiasm works. There's one chiasm where this is the center. That's May 2nd, 1844. And that's July 18th, and this is February 16th. And there's another one where April 19th is the center, and this is June 22nd. Now, June 22nd symbolizes FFA. And we use that 126 days, that's divided into two periods of 63 days to represent the line of FFA as well. So we can see that what happened on the June 22nd date in 2020 is related to FFA as well. But when we deal with what happened on December 6th, all of this is about a separation that happens between the true and the false. And we can see that on December 6th, the FFA structure fell, but FFA still has carried on. Correct? That is, the movement still has not died. And we had these remaining time from July 18th to December 25th for something to happen in regard to this movement. And what we found on December 25th is that God gave us light in regard to this movement, that he was still leading it, but that the movement has changed into a new phase. And what's the new phase of the movement? What was different before December 25th and is different after December 25th?
some of the lines.
Okay, but there's something that's changed. I tried to make it really clear in my presentations on
Aren't we
December 24th and 25th.
Aren't we refining the message and clarifying the message?
Okay, so we were studying before and we were understanding the message. But what specifically did what knowledge did Stephen give us on December 25th?
Oh, yeah, the starting point up to 321. Can't
Okay.
remember.
So from
Oh,
457 BC to 321, which is the
Yeah.
Sunday law, there is 777 years. So what does that mean?
Right.
How did we interpret it? What did we understand this to mean? I think Stephen's here, isn't he? Maybe he can tell us what it means.
I did know, but mind is working right now.
So one is it was a sign of something. What was it a sign of? Because what did we think December 25th was going to be? How did we mark it? Even though we didn't say that it was going to happen on that day, what did we say December 25th was?
You kept saying it's the end of our line. So I figured we're going to have a different phase in our
Okay.
lives.
Okay. So when I say the end of our line, I mean of the 777 chiasm structure. So it ends something, right? And Stephen found that there's 777 years from 457 BC to 321 AD, which is the Sunday law. And we were teaching that the symbol of December 25th, 2021 was the Sunday law. And we had also the 20th day of the 9th month. And we also had Jehoiachin coming out of his prison on the 25th day of the 12th month. So we had all these symbols, but we didn't know what it meant. Prior to December 25th, we weren't sure what December 25th meant. Now, some people are saying it was a close of probation for the priests, and unless you accept certain things that they're saying, your probation has closed. So I don't think that that's correct. It's not a close of probation, because there's only a close of probation for, and he was saying in the sense that they're holy, right? So he's trying to make it, let him be righteous still. So what did we say December 25th was, Dwight?
I'm still half asleep.
Okay. Okay, the strange wives. What are those?
There we go. This was our separation from the strange wives representing the strange doctrines of Protestantism.
Great.
Okay, and we're going to do it starting from the first day of the 10th month, and it's going to be completed on the first day of the first month according to the law.
Right.
So what we are doing right now is we've been giving now a very specific work. We're supposed to separate from the strange wives. And what are those strange wives, more specifically, in this movement? How would we characterize that?
Didn't we say strange doctrine or Protestant doctrine?
Okay, so Protestant
Ideas?
ways of studying.
Oh, okay.
Protestant ways of study, but also anything that is fantastic or
Fanatical?
emotionally grabbing.
Okay, right. So, so my argument is, and people could be upset with me about this, but I still believe that there's fanaticism in this movement and that people are not following the line of study that was given to this movement with the claims that they're making, either about future dates or future events.
Meaning they're not following Miller's rules.
Well, and in order to follow these rules properly, how do we know that we're following Miller's rules? What is the primary rule that this movement has been using?
To go in faith.
Okay, well, that's important, but you can't move ahead in faith unless you do what?
Chris had something to say.
Okay, Chris, did you have something to say?
Yeah, your wife said it actually. I was going to say that we have to receive it in faith.
Okay, we receive it in faith, but are we told to not go back and look at the past
Right.
to understand the present, to have light for our feet? And that if we want to know how we are to study, we have to examine how we studied in the past.
The past is like a template.
Yeah, it
Right.
becomes a template. This is what this whole movement has been based upon. Now, I don't think that some of the things that are happening, I guess I should say, are ignoring that. That is, people make claims that they're following Miller's rules when they're not. And that's because they are ignoring the past. In order to understand the present and to have light for our feet to move forward, we have to understand the past. Now, the movement has been doing this. We've been doing this in our studies. But we came to an understanding on December 25th, 2021, very specifically, that we now are separating from the strange wives and that this has to be done according to the law. So what is the law that we are following that can cause us, that helps us to separate from the strange wives?
Millerites rules?
So Miller's rules, right?
Miller's rules.
The rules that have been given to us is the means by which we can correct the errors that we have. Now, some people have argued that there are no errors. That is, one person has pointed out a video that I posted of Jeff from November of 2018, where Jeff is actually dealing with the chiasms. He's dealing with the chiasm, the 252 days from November 9th to July 18th. And in that video, I make some comments that Jeff is not understanding the lines correctly. I'm not saying it that way. But he's looking at the lines and he's saying the third angel's message is the Sunday law. And that is correct. But he's mixing the lines together. He's mixing the small line on the big line. And at the time, I didn't really know the answer. And we've come to understand that this whole movement is the Sunday law on the big line. It is where this movement, everything that we've done is part of that Sunday law. So the mighty angel of Revelation 18 coming down at the Sunday law according to Ellen White and according to us at 9/11 is not contradictory. 9/11 is the Sunday law. And so this person is arguing that since I'm contradicting Jeff or I'm trying to correct Jeff, that I need to repent. But actually, God has been showing us exactly how to understand these lines. It is true that Jeff didn't understand how the lines fit together. Did Miller understand? Did Miller have things that needed to be corrected in his understanding?
Yes, he did.
But was he given the commencement of the chain of truth?
Absolutely.
Right? He was given 677. He was given 538. He was given 457, right? 538 AD.
We're supposed to learn from their mistakes.
What was Jeff given? To me, there's a very specific thing Jeff was given.
The time of the end, history repeating.
Okay, yeah. And I would sum it up this way. To me, this is what Jeff was given. 9/11, midnight cry, and the Sunday law. This is what Jeff was given. This being the first day of the first month, the fifth day of the fourth month, the first day of the 5th month, and the 10th day of the 7th month. This is the unsealing of Millerite history. We could say, there's more to it than that. But in this context, the things that was given to Jeff was these lines, these waymarks from Millerite history, the unsealing of the 7 thunders. That is the specific message. Now it began because there's 7 thunders and they were unsealed progressively. So what was the first thunder that was unsealed? I'm going to add to this. Okay, what's the first thunder that's unsealed? What does Jeff see first?
Time at the end.
Yeah, so he sees the time of the end, 1989. That's the first thunder. Now, what's the second thunder that he sees? What's the second thing that's unsealed to Jeff after he sees 1989? This one's tricky.
1996.
Okay, so no, so he's not given 1996 next. He's going to be given, because if you look historically, he's going to see 1989 first, that he's going to see we're repeating Millerite history. But 9/11 is going to be a bit later, right? And 1996 is a waymark, but it's seen in retrospective. So I would say the next one is the Sunday law. The next thing he sees is the Sunday law. So once he sees 1989, he starts to see the Sunday law. That is, he compares the Sunday law to October 22nd, 1844. So he's given this. Does that make sense to people, what I'm saying? That he's not given this history yet. He's already comparing the Sunday law to October 22nd, 1844 as a close of probation, prior to 9/11, prior to understanding midnight and the midnight cry.
I think that makes sense.
Right? Now we could also say, originally he had 1989 Sunday law and the close of probation. So we could put that there. That is, the first thing he was given was this line here. But remember, he put the loud cry, as Ellen White does, as a parallel to the midnight cry. So he never had the midnight cry over here. He had the midnight cry over here after the Sunday law. He had the angel of Revelation 18 coming down. But then he's going to be given insight into 9/11, that 9/11 is the Sunday law, that the angel of Revelation 18 is going to come down here. Now he has another thing, and maybe this isn't quite the correct order, but does he come to understand August 11th, 1840 as 9/11? Would that be an unsealing of Millerite history?
Yes.
Okay, so we could say here, this is August 11th, 1840, and he even understands this before he understands this is the first day of the first month. So when I say 9/11, he gets this 9/11 before he gets this 9/11, right? So I would say that the unsealing of the 7 thunders is this history from 1989 to the close of the probation. Now, I don't put the 7 thunders are in order of the waymarks. That is, the 7 thunders sealed up the history of the first and second angels' messages. There is sealing up of that history, and the unsealing of them didn't occur in the early history of Adventism. It occurred in our history. Now I say all of this because when we're looking at this line here, so I'm going to get rid of this, and we're going to go back to this line here of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. We can see that this is the Sunday law. So this is the history of the first and second angels' messages. Okay? Would we agree with that? Just as this is the history of the first and second angels' messages.
I think I can see that.
And this is a progressive destruction of four. This is the four generations.
So that's a progressive destruction of four, just like what you're presenting below on the 1260 days that you're showing from the crucifixion to the stoning of Stephen.
Yeah, so to the stoning of Stephen, with the Sunday law here, there is a history leading up in this 3.5 years that finally leads to the close of probation for the Jewish nation. Now it's going to be followed again 36 years later with the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. But there has to be a reform line here, just like as there's a reform line here.
So is the first 1260 from 27 AD to the cross the final close of probation upon the leadership, and then the second on the people itself?
Yeah. Upon the nation. So this is the leadership. This is the nation. But you
Okay.
can, it becomes like these Russian dolls sometimes. You got things concealed within other things. But there's lots to this reform line. But we can clearly see that this reform line of John the Baptist to Christ, and I'm putting it here 27 AD. We know John is born earlier, and it marks the time of the end and so forth. But we would parallel this, if we're going to parallel this to Millerite history, this would be from August 11th, 1840 to October 22nd, 1844. The proclamation of the first and second angels' messages after the first angel is empowered. And we can see that the baptism of Christ is an empowerment of the first angel's message. And just like Samuel Snow comes after the empowerment of the first angel's message, and when we have Jesus here, we have the disciples, they're connected with Christ, because Jesus is going to begin to call the disciples before he proclaims his second angel's message. So Jesus exists here as prior to this, because he's actually going to have to call his disciples. But the giving of that second angel's message by Christ happens after he calls his disciples. And then the disciples have this experience, which is John 6:66, that would parallel July 18 in Millerite history, and I believe July 18 in our history. Now, we can then say that we have this prediction before midnight, just as the disciples do, just as John the Baptist, or not John the Baptist, Samuel Snow does. So when December 25th, 2021 came, a whole bunch of lines came together. And these lines exist in the past. And we need to understand them fully. We need to know the line of Joseph. We need to know that Joseph is this movement. We need to know that the disciples are this movement. We need to know that Samuel Snow is this movement. Ezekiel is also this movement, as we will see. And if we don't know who we are, we're not going to know what our responsibilities are. We have to know who we are, when we are, and what we are to do. what our responsibilities are. And our responsibilities right now is to separate from the strange wives. And we're going to see when, and I have so much trouble with this line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not because I don't understand it, because I'm pretty sure that I do understand how it's laid out, but there's just so much detail, so many aspects to it, that it's really hard to lay on a line. You have to know that you're dealing with Abraham, because here's Abraham, he's the first angel's message, but he has a reform line. And that reform line is not this reform line. It's his personal reform line. It's the expansion of this message. But that reform line can be laid out as part of this first angel's message. And we never really understood that with Miller. Because when we look at Miller, remember what we did with Miller? Does anybody remember? I'm gonna go here. I'm gonna turn my mic on, turn off the camera.
You can switch screens.
Yeah, switch screens so they don't see that.
And your sound, you mean? too.
Yeah, I changed my sound. And so did Miller have a personal reform line? And was his reform line connected to the formalization and the empowerment of the message?
You just switch screens.
I know. I have to do that. Anybody remember that?
Could you repeat that again, please?
Okay. So Miller, he had a personal reform line, right? We can accept that. And in his personal reform line, we had worked out, here it is, Miller's line. Hopefully you can see that.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, oops, let's make it a little bit better. That's too big. Okay, I guess we're stuck there. So in his personal reform line, we had lined this up with our line. So he has a period of darkness. He gets his concordance in 1798. There's an increase of knowledge. And he has his personal sort of struggle with deism. And then he's going to come to the battle at Lake Champlain, or the Battle of Plattsburgh, right? And that's going to be in 1814 on September 11th. And that's going to be the empowerment of that increase of light, of that first angel's message that comes to Miller personally, right? And we can line that up with 9/11. That's the empowerment of the first angel's message in our line.
Right.
So we can also see, we're going to just say we don't have a date for it, but we probably could find a date from Miller's biography that could line up with the empowerment of the first angel's message. We probably could find some event in his life that we could mark that as a formalization, I mean. And then the empowerment, of course, is the battle at Lake Champlain, which is on September 11th. And he writes that letter where he sees God's hand. So God preserved him. He saw that he always believed in a God, but he was a deist, which means that God doesn't act in human affairs, has no interest. But he saw that God did. And then 2 years later, on September 11th, we're going to see that the second angel arrives. Because what ends up happening for Miller personally on that day, September 11th, 1816? Would we mark his conversion there?
Would we mark his conversion or his enlightened understanding of what he'd been studying?
Okay. Yeah. So an enlightened understanding, but he then recognizes, because they're going to have this celebration, 2-year anniversary of the battle, and they're going to have a ball. But instead, because of the preacher's sermon, a strong conviction comes on everyone, and then they decide not to have this ball. So they're not going to have this celebration. And this is this sober time for him. Now, in 1818, however long later, what time in 1818 he begins his study, I don't know. Or actually, he begins it in 1816, pardon me. So he's going to end it in 1818. So he's going to beginning to study. So under the second angel's message, is he going to have an increase of light from 1816 to 1818? Which we always look at from the arrival of the first angel, but we don't think about it from the arrival of the second angel. But all of this line is an increase of light. So in 1818, he knows that in about 25 years' time, that the 2300 days, the 2520, and the 1335 are going to end. And he connects it to the second coming of Christ, about 25 years' time, about the year 1843. And then he comes to that conclusion, and then in 1831, he's asked to preach when his nephew comes to his house, after he's prayed to God and sort of bargained with God and saying, well, unless somebody comes and asks me, I'm not going to give this message. But somebody comes and asks him. And then in 1833, can we see that that's the arrival of the third angel's message, in that when he gets his credentials, that we can see these 7 steps, that is all about Miller. That this is the preparation of Miller as the leader of this movement. Does that make sense? So that's from the arrival of the first angel to the formalization of the first angel's message. So if we had the Millerite line under here, you'd have 1798 here, and you'd have 1833 here, and all of Miller's line would fit into that period of time. So can we see that Abraham's, I'm going to have to draw these things out here on the computer again for Abraham. Maybe I can do that because we started doing it down here, this progressive destruction of 4. And I'm not sure I'm completely satisfied with that, but we're going to come back to it later. So I guess I could borrow. I'm just trying to see what I could borrow here. I don't seem to have the Millerite line. It must be somewhere. Okay, our line, cosmic line. Yeah, I don't have the Miller line. I'll have to do that later. I'm not going to spend time drawing it while I'm presenting. Okay, is this in people's? Does anybody have questions? Is this coming together in your mind? Are we seeing that with Abraham, we're going to have a reform line just like we do with Miller, and that reform line is going to bleed into the next waymark on the bigger reform line, which is the reform line of that first 215 years of the 430 years.
Starting to come together for me.
Okay. Yeah. So there are some details that, as I continue to study this, I start to notice things, that I never noticed. So if we go back to this whiteboard here, I don't like the way that is. Right. So we can see that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that's the first 3, is leading to the Sunday law, which was what we've taught that the story of Joseph is, and that Joseph parallels the disciples, but Abraham parallels Miller. That is, he's the first angel's message. Miller's the first angel's message. And then you're going to have Isaac. Now, is Abraham tied up with Isaac? Is Miller tied up with the second angel's message? Can we see that they bleed into each other?
Yes.
Okay. And so So there's not always this well-defined line. There isn't just Miller, there isn't just Jeff, and then 9/11 happens, there's someone else, right? We can see that Jeff's on both part of it, so is Miller, so's Abraham. He's part of that line of Isaac. But the reform line of Isaac is the arrival of the second angel. And we're going to have to spend time tomorrow looking at Isaac. I was going to do that today, but I think now you can see how Abraham's reform line, which we looked at last week, and now we can see that Isaac's reform line is the second angel's message. And it's going to be leading to the Sunday law. Now, we're going to see that Jacob is the third angel's message, right? So you got Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Jacob arrives, so to speak, at the Sunday law, but he's going to have a personal reform line. So in his personal reform line, he obviously arrives earlier, but he arrives at the Sunday law when he goes into Egypt, because that's what's being prophesied. Can we see that Abraham's prophecy is about that it's a time prophecy that's really pointing to 1533 BC, right? That he's not prophesying. Abraham's not prophesying specifically about the Sunday law. He's more prophesying about the end of the Sunday law. But can we see that he's also prophesying about the Sunday law? Because since they're going to go into Egypt and they're going to come out, he has to be prophesying them going in, right? They're going to be afflicted for 4 generations.
Correct.
Okay. So, but Abraham's primary message, his personal reform line is about the seed, but his prophecy is also about the seed, right? Was Jeff's prophesying about the Sunday law? Even though he's the first angel.
It had to be.
Yeah. Miller was prophesying about the Sunday law, even though he's also the first angel, right? So the question is, why do we have a second angel? If the first angel is about the second angel, or about the Sunday law, why is there the second angel? What is it that the second angel adds?
A deeper revelation of the truth.
Okay, it definitely is a greater increase of light. So we could see that with snow, that there's a development of understanding. Now, we're going to see in the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that Joseph is going to be that second angel's message. He's going to be that parallels snow and the disciples. Or maybe, and the thing is, I'm not certain about this. I could even argue that Joseph is Christ, because he's a type of Christ. So there are some things about Joseph's line we're going to have to look at and try to understand Isaac's. But Isaac's line and Jacob's line, trying to understand how that is connected. What we know about Isaac is that his line, the arrival of the second angel, and I'm not sure if I should do it this way or not. So we're going to look at this tomorrow. But when we look at Isaac, we'll try to decide. Because when he gives birth to Jacob and Esau, that to me is the arrival of the second angel's message. So Isaac has a personal reform line, but his role is the bringing about of Jacob and Esau, because that's the double. Stephen, you have a thought?
Yeah, I would say begetting Esau and Jacob, rather than you said the birth.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the begetting of them. Okay. I would agree with you there. I sort of include the two together, but yes, it's the begetting of Jacob and Esau. So there's, to me, I'm just fascinated as I look at Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then of course the 12 sons of Jacob, including Joseph. and what this means to our understanding of the lines. And I haven't sorted out everything, but we can see that we have to take it this way, that we have to line those 215 years up with the first 1260 of Christ's week. Okay. And then we're going to see, of course, with the second angel's message arriving in the way that it does with the begetting of Jacob and Esau. Then we're going to have to see that there's a formalization, that there's an empowerment, and that there's then the arrival of the third angel's message, and then the story of Joseph, how it fits into that. That's really the problematic thing. Now, there are other ways that we could do it. So I've looked at a number of different ways, and we may decide in the end to change exactly how we lay down these lines. But the essential idea is that we have this 3-step testing prophetic message that happens in this period of 215 years. So that's what we're going to try to delve into this week. We're going to look at Isaac. We're going to spend some time with the story of Isaac, because there's a lot there. And then we're going to have to deal probably next week with the story of Jacob, though those are going to overlap a bit. Any other thoughts here? Anything that anybody sees?
I was looking more into the story of the Exodus,
Okay.
and in reading Mrs. White about the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire,
Mm-hmm.
I came to the realization that the smoking furnace and burning lamp
Hmm.
are like symbols, or the cloud and the cloud is a symbol. The two clouds are a symbol of those two same items.
Okay.
The smoking lamp and the burning lamp and the smoking furnace.
Symbolize the cloud and the pillar.
Right.
That's a good insight. Yeah. And God, of course, the beginning and the ending here. He's declaring the end from the beginning, but it becomes a symbol of this covenant. Yeah. Just a question here. What's the first chiasm in the Bible? Anybody know? Because here we have, chiasm, Canaan and Egypt. The 430 years is Canaan and Egypt. But what's the first chiasm that the Bible presents? Anybody know?
The longest one that I've always looked at is the fall of man to the redemption of man, that's showing in the first 3 chapters of Genesis to the last 3 chapters of Revelation.
Okay, well, that is a chiasm. That's a pretty big one. The one I'm thinking of is probably the smallest chiasm that I know of. It's also the first.
Would that be the 2 days? Sorry, the 2 periods of 7 days
Okay.
divided by the door shut door in the ark?
Okay. How about we go to Genesis chapter 1? What about a day? Is a day a chiasm? Night and day, dark and light.
Yes.
Okay. So that to me is the most basic chiasm. And when you think about it, when we look at these chiasms, we often talk about, the beginning and the ending, we talk about the middle. But we know that the chiasm is marking, in many cases, for instance, the cross, Christ 3.5 years ministering on earth, Christ 3.5 years in heaven. The 25-24 Northern Israel, Satanic's counterfeit covenant week, where 1260 years of paganism, 1260 years of papalism, or Canaan in Egypt for the 430 years, or night and day for the day, because the evening begins it. And we can see that there is this this basic structure that God is using. And what's the purpose of the day? Why does God create a day in the first place? I mean, that's a really stupid question, but maybe somebody can give me a sensible answer from the question. Why did God create the day?
We could see our way and perform what we need to do clearly. And so most plants need light to grow.
Okay, well, you're thinking of practical terms. I'm thinking prophetically.
Oh, of course.
Because
Well, Christ said, "He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, because I am the light of life." So
okay, so it becomes a symbol of a dividing of something, right? And it's a division of time. That is, it's our basic way in which we divide time, because we wouldn't have hours if we didn't have days, because hours are just dividing the day. So God's given us this basic unit of time, and it's prophetic. It's a prophetic symbol. And we've seen all of the symbolisms attached to dates and days and times and hours and minutes and seconds, right? God's given us this unit of time. It's a prophetic symbol that speaks to God in the giving of light, and that we always start with darkness and then we have light. So the evening marks the beginning of the day, because we're starting in darkness, and then we have the dawn, the increase of light. Doesn't mean that when you lay them up on these reform lines that it's going to look like that. But we in a sense can say that, because even though we talk about a period of darkness that precedes the time of the end, that whole period is going to be about an increase of light. So you have these overlapping structures that talk about a period of darkness and then an increase of light. So it's just something to think about in the context of a prophecy. So, we've been in a period of darkness in Adventism since 1957, and God's been giving us an increase of light. And that increase of light has come from understanding the past. So without understanding the past, we would be where the church is today. Correct? Because they haven't received this increase of light.
Right.
They've actually rejected the past. They rejected Millerite history.
They've set aside anything having to do with the past.
Yeah. So for them, the darkness has increased. But now there's many Adventists who are in that darkness still, who, if they were having to have that light shine upon them, they would respond, because they're looking for light. And that's why we see that Adventists are hungry, many of them. And that's why they spend so much time watching all of these different videos that you see on the internet, purporting to present some kind of conservative Adventism or some kind of present truth. And I'm always sad, and I hope I'm not stepping on anybody's toes, but I probably am, when we spend time watching messages that aren't part of this message, that is, if we're to separate from the strange wives, according to the law, and we find people who are saying things that we agree with, but they aren't really following Miller's rules. They're not doing line upon line. They're not looking for light in the way that we are. And even though they may say some things that we agree with, we have to separate from them. A lot of us feel, okay, we can separate from the Adventist church, but we still think, if we can find these independent ministries that are teaching, righteousness by faith or things like that, that somehow there's light in it. And I would say that we've been given greater light. And if we don't spend time understanding this light, we will end up where those people are. We're not going to reach them by watching their videos. There is a role in which we go to Adventist churches because we need the people that we know that are searching for light. We need to interact with them, but we're not going there just for the message. And the vast majority of the times, there would be no point in in saying that we're there for the messages that are being given. But God's given us light, and we need to study this light. And we need to separate from the strange wives. And that's what we're doing right now in our study. We're being corrected. I've had many things that I thought, some of them, quite, precious little opinions, I guess you might call them, regarding the Exodus and the chronology of the Exodus, which I've had to set aside and accept what other people have said. So we can be corrected. So if there's no further thoughts, let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so grateful, so very grateful for the light that you've given this movement. And we ask, Lord, that we can continue to walk in the light that you have been giving us. We ask for forgiveness for our unChristlikeness of character, for our stubbornness of heart, for our unwillingness to listen, for our indolence, for our impatience, for our lack of trust in you, and for our criticisms of those around us. We ask, Lord, that you can show us our sin, the things that we need to do. We pray for each person. We pray that we can learn to encourage and lift up those that are struggling. And we pray, Lord, that you can be with us throughout this day, throughout this week in our studies. And we ask, Lord, that you can bring us together again to study your word. This is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.